always good to see different perspective the ecosystem will live in. Ecosystem, if you want to talk about ecosystem, can be of different layers, right? Ecosystem could be from knowledge generation, ecosystem could be application, ecosystem could be at the receiving end, and there is ecosystem that actually talks about dissemination and connection from the something that has been developed to something that has to reach. If you all think and see around you, what we all know is that significant amount of knowledge is being generated, significant amount of technologies are being developed, right? The missing link, the biggest missing link currently has been the dissemination. How does a technology reach somewhere where it is destined to reach? Most 70 to 80%, or I would say, I can definitely put 75% of the medical devices which are being generated, which people can see and be very excited about, are not being sold more than possibly few numbers on your fingertips. But they look very good when actually the concept is being developed, when they look very great when actually the proposition is made that that device will address that particular solution. There are multiple aspects to it why it doesn't happen, right? And I think those aspects possibly is something that our today's speaker actually tries to address. Right? The idea is that how do you look at the technology which is sometimes made for the lowest strata in terms of economy, right? And how that strata, which more or less makes up around 60 to 70% of our population, when people actually try to build affordable solutions, accessible solutions, why they are not being there. Like yesterday, if you read somebody's comment, I forgot the name, is that there are several things which have happened for the lower strata. If you look at the papers, but it has always stayed on the paper. It has never reached there, and there is something happening between what is happening. It is and there are foundations which I do not know whether there is a lineage, but I would like to know more about today, like Vadvani Foundation, which is doing something in form of Wish foundation that they have, which tries to, and today's speaker, Dr. Subodh, who is trying to take those to the next level. And what we would like to hear from Dr. Subodh, who has her training and PhD from ex-secretary of DBT, Dr. Ban, working at the rotavirus, the big announcement which happened a couple of years back. I was with Dr. Tang yesterday at THSTI, where it is being taken to the next level, and with Hillman Labs, Dr. Gill, right? So that's the next step of that. And you do know about the rotavirus thing, so you might want to just say a couple of words about it, because it has been the first, all Bharat Biotech has taken it forward, if I'm not wrong. And that was a very exciting work that actually has come out of Dr. Bhan's lab, which has gone to the next level. But of course, so the training has come from there. After that, I gather that you touched another DG, right? In terms of the India had a phenomenal program. I think I would have loved to see that going forward, called OSDD. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Open Source Drug Discovery Program. It was a phenomenal program in terms of thought process. It is still alive. It could have gone much more miles, according to me. But it has a very good concept by Dr. Brahmachari, who was the DG of CSIR for long enough, and also who brought it from the IGIB perspective at that point of time. And that is something very, very, so Dr. Subodh was senior scientist at OSDD as well. So you're seeing the translation aspect that is there. She has been guest faculty at PHFI, the Public Health Foundation of India, as well as now, after this journey, possibly she has taken something that actually I just mentioned at the beginning. How do you connect technologies and solutions to the people who need that, the grassroots, the lower strata of the economy? And how do you make it happen? Otherwise, great technologies may stand and stay in the showcase, in the windows, and people do window shopping and go back. So how do you connect that aspect is something that we look forward to, and much more. That is only one aspect possibly I highlighted, but much more from you. So thank you so much for coming here. I'd like to thank India Bioscience, who has actually, triggered this entire talk and said that, this is something that will be very exciting. So thank you, Smita, for doing that. And we look forward to more from you. Thank you so much for coming.
afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Rasleen, for a wonderful introduction. Actually, you made my life a lot easier. I was about to say most of the things that you already did.
Oh gosh.
Thanks, Smita, for organizing and the India Bioscience team, Manjula and also Manupriya for enabling this. Before I go on, so here we have students, startups, people starting up or somewhere in between, desirous of starting up. Is there any group that I've left? That's about it? Okay. Thank you so much. So before, so I have been roughly at, each of these junctions at different point of my career. But where I really started from, I would go down to that first. So as Zasleen was saying, I did my PhD with Professor M.K. Bhan. I was actually one of his last students because during my PhD he became the secretary of DBT and we were going back and forth between DBT and AIIMS. And prior to that, my research experience had been either in an academic setup or I was working also in South Campus as well as National Institute of Immunology, which are hardcore research institute. At AIIMS, it was my first experience where my lab was in the so-called teaching block, but there were always an inflow of patients coming and visiting the faculty rooms, which were adjacent to the labs. So if you can imagine a scenario, stepping out of the lab and seeing so many people sitting by the corridor waiting to meet the doctor, and there were clinics held, and so I was doing my PhD at a time where sequencing was not as the technology was not as developed as it is today. The facility was not developed as it is today. So my DC coordinators decided that I should do manual sequencing in the lab, and I was doing that with the urea gels. Unfortunately, we did not have an imaging system in the Department of Pediatrics where I was doing my PhD, so I had to take the entire cassette either to the nuclear medicine lab, which was always occupied, or the second one was in the emergency. So this was my first experience where I saw patients, and when I was waiting at the emergency, you can imagine what kind of cases would come. And that changed my perspective of research really. When from a hardcore research institute coming to a clinical scenario and actually seeing the patients even outside of AIIMS sitting and paying and waiting for months to be attended by a specialist doctor at AIIMS, that somewhat changed my perspective of how research is and what is it aimed for. And that is how I started thinking about research more in translational aspects. Is that something that is coming out of it which can benefit and go to the people for whom it is actually the purpose. So traditionally we educate ourselves, and our approach is more in terms of looking at different aspects as independent observations. We are specializing in a specific domain, really not understanding what is happening in the other end. And what we have end up most of the time is a prototype or a product which requires further tweaking, and it's another work in progress, another tweaking, another set of trials and so forth. So is there a way where these working in the silos can be bridged, where the researchers and the technologists are taking inputs from the product developers so that it does not wait for one thing to finish before the other thing starts? So it's not sequential, rather than can it co-evolve? Also, what we realize that many times the target beneficiary for whom it is really meant to be, how is it going towards them? How are they responding to the product or the service which is developing and coming out of the research labs? And how is it going to be implemented in the field? That really doesn't come up till the time the research is out there and ready, with certain publications and patents. We start thinking about it after all this has happened, after some proof of concept has been developed and some approvals have been taken. Only then we sequentially go forward. So now there is, as was said, we need to think about it in a kind of a cross-sectional way where we are also talking to other people of how this can be taken forward while we are developing the solution. And one thing that is very important is the importance of piloting while developing products. And as most of you here are kind of working on something that you hope to take beyond in the market, piloting, getting feedback, getting feedback from the beneficiary while doing the work is very important. So before I go on to this, while you have been developing this, I'm shifting here and kind of want to ask you, when you are developing a solution, have you ever thought of the rural market as a market that you would potentially target, or you want your services or the product to end up? Has any of you really given it a thought in terms of beyond the urban market? Okay, 1, 2. So this is something that we need to start thinking about even more, because if you see, and I'm just going to highlight the basic points, is when you are dealing with the urban markets and the rural markets, you see that anyway there are a lot of products and services which are already available. So you're really looking at, you're contributing to a saturated market, whereas in the rural markets there is something which is a requirement there, but you probably are deterred by accessibility, the network, the lack of networks, and so forth. Also, if you see, there is a much better chance of your product or the service doing well, because probably you are the first who's reaching out to the market in the first place. And why is that important? So if you know, the title of the talk is, and the main focus on the talk is, how do you co-create to be able to reach the rural markets, and do that while the work is in progress. So if you see that now most of the enterprises or the startups which are coming out are aligning themselves to something called becoming an inclusive enterprise. And what is inclusive enterprise? This is where the people at the base of the pyramid are engaged as producer, supplier, workers, distributor, consumer, or as innovator. Now we would not think of people at the bottom of the pyramid as consumers really. We would think that probably there is not enough paying capacity for the product and so forth. But if you see in terms of the numbers, what we are catering to is really the tip. And when you look at the numbers in India and China, which are the biggest populations in the world, you see that about 60 to 70% of the population is in the rural areas, and we are targeting a very small niche, which is really 30%, and it is getting competitive. It is already clustered with a lot of services and products, and they are not reaching to where they really are required, right? So we are continuously missing out the part of the pyramid where the services are required, the products are required, and there is a greater chance of success, because most of the people are deterred into reaching rural markets. And this is where is an area where your product can benefit, your service can benefit, and also there is probably a first mover's advantage for you entering in these markets. And what we are looking at is, here the so-called poor, but they are not the BPLs, they are not the below poverty line. They have paying capacity. It's just that the services, the infrastructure is not available to them. So this is the 1 billion that is the next target in terms of moving out of the urban markets and targeting these populations in the rural areas, which can to some extent afford and also be part of the enterprise. And I'll come to that, how they can also be part of the startups or can be part of the pipeline for better efficiency of a startup in those areas. But those services do not reach here. So we are really, when we are talking co-creating to reach the next billion, we are really talking about this population. So from the bottom of the pyramid, they are now being termed as the next billion up.
One question. Is there a reason that the poor, the 1 billion poor are ignored?
Yeah, I will come to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So why even think about entering the rural markets where you think that the urban market is more mature, you have the better better networks and access. So one is that India is primarily a young population, of majority of the population being below 35 years. There is higher digital literacy than alphabetic literacy in our country. So a person might not be able to write, but is very, you give him or her a smartphone, by the end of the day, he or she will be explaining all the features to you, what happens. So there is definitely that adaptability. Also, where we have workforce, we are a huge population. And would you imagine, I mean, when I got to know this figure, I thought I was reading it wrong. But we actually have 10 million people who become age eligible to work every month in our country. So that is the extent of the unemployment and the availability of manpower. I mean, 10 million every month, imagine, become age eligible to work in our country. Then a lot of is being talked about digitalization, about artificial intelligence, about augmented reality and so forth. There's so much scope coming up, and because we have a more digitally literate population, platforms which leverage these in any form have a greater acceptability and have a greater chance of penetration in these areas. Now, why? So, just to put it in numbers, the population. Now, we are talking about the global population. Most of the services are target here, which are the rich or the middle class, the upper middle class, or the middle class who can afford most of the services. Most of the startups, the corporates, target these, and this is their market. Globally, there is a huge market potential in the not so rich population who can still afford. But as we'll get to come to it later, what are the deterrents and why don't they enter this market, and what can be done in a better way to be able to use not just this population as a consumer, but also as a producer and also as a collaborator, as a partner in most of the work that is being done and needs implementation in this area. It's just that reaching this population requires one to come up with innovative solution in terms of processes more than the product. So one is the product development which comes out of the lab, but how do you make it reach this population in a form that they will use it and it is accessible to them, is what requires innovation, and which is a major deterrent. This is what we call a low-hanging fruit, which is not so low-hanging anymore. It's getting competitive. It is getting difficult in an already saturating market. So what my focus is, this is the target audience or the target population that needs to be addressed when we are talking about the go-to solutions which as corporates or as startups we come up with. Inclusive business. Now coming to your point of why. So perseverance, that is continue through the challenges, zigzag, and years until we scale. Perseverance and passion, both are individual trait or the trait of the team developing the solution. To have a bold vision, see a bold vision into reality. But what really we miss out on, we have this in ample amount when we say that we want to do something and we are really passionate about doing something, and this is the problem that I want to solve. These are the solutions that I have. I'm working on that. What we miss out on are partnerships and pilots. How do we think we are going to take this forward? in the current capacity, how do you think you're going to leverage partnerships to take this forward? Secondly, pilots. Can I do pilots while my product is at a certain level but not quite there yet? Because most of the time people say, give us some data, right? Give us some data as a proof of concept of your assay working or your product working. And also many of the times, I'm assuming you would have already had interaction with certain venture capitalists and so forth. They want to know how you want to implement it in the field. What is your target? Who is your customer? Who's your consumer? And now it's not the same old thing of giving it to the hospitals or aligning with the diagnostic labs. Again, there you are limiting yourself. You're limiting the scope of your work. You're limiting the scope of how far the product or the service can go. So these are the things which are required to be thought about even while developing solutions. That is to think of partnerships that go beyond the company's own skill sets, and also pilot to test the model and learn what would work better. It could be an assay on two or three different platforms. Let's see what works better so I can finalize what to finally take forward for the approvals and for scale up. Challenges. Now, challenges. Why don't people really want to go into the rural markets? Firstly, there is no reliable network to enable access to this market. As you saw, these markets are already quite fragmented, right? There is a lot of, besides geographical divide, there is also a lot of language and social culture divide which you have to go by. And I will come to our experiences in a little while. But this is something that takes away most of the time. You know, getting through this takes away more time than actually starting a project. You know, relationship with the local governments. Now you would target probably a state A, B, or C, but all of them might have different policy and regulations which you have to adhere by. There are different policies, different schemes which are applicable in certain geographies, not applicable in certain geography. So for a person or a company which is starting up, there are a lot of variables to negotiate. Limited opportunities to co-create. Once you have, suppose you even do a kind of, you have access to a rural market, but then you want some feedback in terms of how is it doing, how are the people responding to it, how is my data looking. So can I improve upon it based on that that input? Is something that qualitative feedback might not be so easy to get. Difficulty in understanding how to monetize it, or what are the interventional aspects. So in short, accessing a rural market, the first thing somebody comes up is taking a huge rock up the mountain. It's easier to work in a predictable environment, which is the urban market. I have already set of networks I can talk to. They have certain networks that they can access, and I can get the data that I want. But to enter this geography, these are the reasons where people really do not want to take this forward. Now, this is just to give you an example of people who have. And these are some of the early starters who have kind of tweaked their product or services more for the rural markets. For example, Apollo Hospital has a huge network of telehealth clinics only for the rural health. And it is not that it is a philanthropic effort. Don't mistake philanthropy with your desire to access the rural market. It is not philanthropy, it is not charity. It is a social enterprise. And again, don't confuse a social enterprise by when you want to access rural markets. Accessing rural market does not automatically make a social enterprise. Social enterprise has a mandate of solving a particular social pain point while generating employment and income enhancement in the community. The other companies, the traditional companies, or the companies that we really go by, are desirous of entering rural markets are not necessarily social enterprises. So these are companies which have accessed and also made a profitable unit by just having operations which are tweaked for the rural community. Be it microfinancing, be it internet access, be it providing affordable solar power in the community. Dabur has, would you imagine, Dabur has about 50 to 60% of its revenue coming from rural markets. So a major market for Dabur, which is a brand that we all know, is really the rural market. Amul was basically a trendsetter. They were the first to access, and Amul is, by the way, was a cooperative, which is a social enterprise, but it leverages so that it generates income for the community, while also kind of providing livelihood and employment. These are, I'm sorry, the resolution is really poor here, but these are a couple of startups or offshoots. Like this is a M-Krishi, a unit of TCS. So all the corporates have also understood that by limiting themselves only to the urban market, they can go just so as far. So if you see Vodafone, you see Airtel, you see TCS, you see so many banks. They are now making their products or services more suited for rural citizens as opposed to urban only, which is, they had a niche urban consumer. Now they are expanding it more so that they reach this audience, which is the major pool of consumers, which is still untapped. So what does it need? It requires creating an ecosystem. And what all is required here? So unlocking a rural ecosystem, in spite of all the challenges and roadblocks that we discussed about, is tailoring local solutions. That is targeted product development and bottom-up innovation. And this is where it really starts. This starts from the lab, where the product or the service is being developed. If there is an eye on where your final consumer is going to be or your final customer is going to be, this is going to look a little different from if we are just targeting the urban market. So it really goes back. It really goes back down to the drawing board. It really starts differently in that respect. Shaping aspiration, that is by means of consumer education and sustainable development, that is coming up with business model, tweaking business models, and even trying out and piloting different business models and see what is sustainable. Creating buying power, that is by access to credit and income generation. This is something that is also a strong alignment of most of the social enterprises that work. Improving access, that is distribution system and communication. So now coming to 1M 1B, which is a Million for a Billion Foundation, and we have ambitious target that we will empower 1 million worldwide who will further impact 1 billion. This sounds very ambitious, but it's really not. It is something that is doable. We are here at the interface. On one side, we have people, the corporates or the startups, the academia, hospitals, financial institutions, and even governments that we are working with. And on the other side, we have a team which is directly based out of most of these locations and the rural sites that I'm talking about. And here we are in interaction in developing the rural entrepreneurs or the business owners. That is, if you saw here, consumer education developing models, that's what we are doing here by educating the consumer, giving them access to finance, and also developing entrepreneurs and helping them develop business models. These are typically the people who are producers. If you see villages as producers and starting up by themselves. Rural organizations and village citizens are basically who are trained to execute. For them, it is an employment opportunity, income enhancement maybe, besides what they do. But we are also looking at this, developing this segment as somebody who can take the solutions from these, or the work or the R&D of these organizations to the rural areas or at site. Because most of the people here, first, the challenge is they don't want to do it. If they think about doing it, they don't want to develop and invest on logistics and a pipeline to be able to reach that site. Can people trained at the rural sites be trained enough to be able to act as a franchisee, a contract, it could be a contractor model, it could be a franchisee model, it could even be employed. You could have an extended employment option for that child, right? So provided, so he or she becomes a rural entrepreneur or a rural resource for these organizations at site. So it is an easy flow of work and infrastructure for even people who are willing to innovate both product and processes to enter this market. And here we are at the interface of that. How we do it, and this is taking Smita's feedback on what exactly is the model. I just created this slide 2 minutes before coming here. So we work with a lot of fellows and interns, right? We do not want to become an employee-heavy organization, because our mandate requires us to penetrate different geographies. We cannot have local teams set up at different places. We need enablers, but we don't need people to sit there as employees, right? We need enablers to translate the training or the process to a person sitting in the village who can take it forward in a sustainable manner. So here, on one side, 1M, 1B, we have linkages with academia, hospitals, financial institutions and startups and corporates who are willing to enter the rural markets. On the other side, we have our core team, plus we work on a fellowship model where, depending on what we want to do in an area, which project we want to implement, we have the requisite team and fellows. And these are not just any fellows. If it is a thing requiring financial project to be implemented, the fellows are recruited with that adequate background. We also see that our fellows have the necessary sensitivity to operate out of these areas, because a person coming out of an IIT or any engineering college might not know how to go about in a rural scenario, which might be very different from what he or she would have experienced in the city. So these are the fellows with the requisite educational qualification to execute these projects, but also have sensitivity in terms of prior work or some additional projects or something that they have already documented that they are desirous of working in these in this ecosystem. And then we have local partners, which I'll explain to you later, in terms of people who know the terrain better than we do. Now, we want to work with 1 million people who will empower a billion more. We cannot know everything about an area that there is to know. It is not possible for us, and that also makes us huge if we keep increasing our size, if we want to be experts in every market that we want to work in. So we have a local partner who aligns with us, who has on-ground faith and trust of the community. The community has already seen that person for so many years, and they have a good relationship with the community. So our fellows and our team members work with the local partners as well as the local interns. Now these local interns they could be people who want to start up, but they really don't know what to do. They want to be entrepreneurs, but they really don't have an idea to align with, or so they want an opportunity to be able to do something. Here this becomes our local team in enabling these solutions, prototyping, R&D, testing out, or expanding the market of a current solution. And they create rural entrepreneurs who create the final sustainability of that service or the product in the community. And this does not mean they are handling just one. They might be handling more than one. So they become our key contact points who have been trained to be able to do this work. We are currently in different countries, but majority of our work is in India and in the US. When I say training, we've imparted training on entrepreneurship, mainly on entrepreneurship and pipeline creation for underserved communities or marginalized communities which need better services and products. So far, this is our number. We are an organization which is just 2.5 years old, and with a very small core team, but with a very expanded local team, we have been able to achieve this in under 2.5 years. We recently started this program called the Startup Gurukul. And in the Startup Gurukul, we are funded by the Department of Science and Technology, and 1M1B and Tata Trust are co-implementation partners of the Startup Gurukul. We are supported by UN Habitat and UN Women. So 1M1B holds an annual event at the United Nations in March, April every year. Here we document different models and different prototypes and different pipelines which have worked, because the focus is that it should be scaled. It's one point to develop it in one place, but it's no point if you don't tell everybody what worked, what did not work. We also talk very happily about our failures as well, because those are big points of learning as well. So this is so UN Women and UN Habitat supports us in this way, where the fellows who are working with us, they are the key points. So we train the fellows. The fellows work with the local partners, form their local teams, and train the rural entrepreneurs. It is these fellows who actually go and present at the 1M1B United Nations event every March or April. So they show what worked, what did not work. So it's a first-hand report. The Startup Gurukul in India, we had been working in Uttarakhand and Andhra Pradesh earlier on. With the Startup Gurukul program, we have increased our network to Karnataka and Jharkhand from this year onwards. As I was saying, the mandate of the Startup Gurukul is to co-create, giving last mile as a service, educating the people on both ends of this spectrum, helping developing self-sustainable business models for this community, for the rural markets. We are aligned to the Sustainable Development Goal because United Nations is our partner, and we look at the Sustainable Development Goals when we are taking on projects which align with them, and also the market access. So this market access is basically when you have a producer in the village who's desirous of entering the rural market in terms of for cost or better network or better prospect of their product or service. So working from this end as well as working from that end. As I said, the UN SDGs, we are in most of them, but frankly, most of them are quite interlinked with one another. When you work in healthcare, you cannot override not educating the people. So that is how it is. So far, we have worked with various startups. I'm just giving a few examples here, like Agricul, which creates a marketplace for direct selling by the farmers. We give them access to a village, help them create linkages, and the farmers in turn use the Agricul platform and were able to increase their cashew output from 50 kgs to 500 kgs. They also bagged an order from Novotel for continuous supply of their cashews through their platform. Signy Solar, they wanted to enter the market, but they did not know how to go about negotiating the landscape. There was a chap called Sridath. He's an engineering graduate who went to the city, did not like, came back unemployed. He had the requisite skill set because he was an engineer, but he but he wanted to be an entrepreneur. We trained him. We enabled this linkage where Signy directly trained him, and he became their point of contact in their village. So now Signy has a direct, route to the rural market in that village, which is Mori in Andhra Pradesh. CFOG is an IoT-based computing system. So they do a lot of, testing on waters, which we gave them access to the, the fishermen community in the village because of our presence and network there. They now have a big partnership with the government of fisheries, giving them opportunity to scale across the state and not just the village. When we talk about healthcare, I don't have to reiterate the fact that India has a very poor doctor to patient ratio, and there is a requirement, especially in the rural community. So whereas the population is majorly in the rural setup, the doctors are more in the urban setup. So, and even the government hospitals, this was the first-hand experience. The hospitals are there, the doctors and the infrastructure is not. So there is a need for this to be linked. Healthcare, first, when we talk about schemes, we talk about a lot of healthcare initiatives, but when we ultimately write papers, we quote figures from US and Europe, right? And that's an unfortunate thing, which, all of us have to, be a part of that, because information from where problems actually are in the majority of the community, we do not have adequate data, right? So we don't have, I have personally had a lot of problem when I wanted to cite Indian data when I was working about rotavirus. And yeah, forgot to mention that I was part of the vaccine team. So when we were looking, we were always quoting US or European figures, right? And that happens even now. Why don't we have data from the areas, right? So can these sites not also become areas for data generation and knowing those sites better? We are implementing, nationwide, and this is not to criticize. This is just to make, give a positive feedback on how it can be better. Is that nationwide schemes and programs are good, but there might be some few schemes which need special attention in a particular area. Right now, that data, the formulation of those schemes and programs for the area is also not very well understood. So besides healthcare, can these centers not also double up as areas where we are getting data and do that, not just epidemiology, but also do significant credible R&D in this area? So we are looking at it as not just healthcare, but healthcare plus. So and there is a lot of scope for hospitals to come, and Apollo has been doing a great job. We have partnered with CARE Hospital has a big presence in the southern states, and they are our healthcare partners, not just in Karnataka and Andhra, but through the startup Gurukul, we will be working together in Uttarakhand and Jharkhand as well. So with their technology and the support of back-end doctors, we are going to be educating and training primary healthcare workers in the community to be able to do that job. And again, it's not philanthropy, it is a social initiative, which is also backed by revenue. So don't confuse when we are saying rural markets, because that is what, first thing comes to our mind, that this is philanthropy. No, this is not philanthropy. There is a business model behind that also, right? Just that when we are developing, we need to take care of what would work in such a setting. As we said, tailor-made solutions. If we can think about when we are developing, creating an ecosystem. I gave here an example of healthcare, but as I showed, we were also working in other domains. Healthcare, what we did, and this is just to tell you how we bring it all together, is one is the hospitals and the clinics that we work with. In this it was individual doctors also who were volunteering to help us get started initially. But hospitals like CARE and their doctors. Now, when we enter communities, we don't want to be seen as running a parallel system, or we do not want to be seen as competitors, because that will shoo away a majority of the people who would be, already operating in that area. Rather, we make it a little inclusive. All the local players in that area are in some model or the other, so that they also earn out of it, are engaged to create that ecosystem. So they are not standalone people watching us from a distance. They actually become, stakeholders in the running of the center. And the center itself is being run by the rural entrepreneur who's trained and is executing a service or a product from the various organizations that I discussed. Our busy schedule looks like this, where, because we realize that staying in one place does not give us the access, especially in hill areas where 2 kilometers, 5 kilometers is also a huge distance to travel. We have a hub and spoke model. So we have a hub which has all the administrative, financial handling as well as manpower. But we also have spokes, so that people from the community who are part of the center reach out to the different geographies and have better penetration in the community. So I'll just skip this. This is just a snapshot of a few things that we did. Before we even started the program, we had a lot of community level meetings in the villages. This is basically to ask them what you want. And many times we have worked backwards, asking the community what you really want, what you don't have, and then linking the relevant startups and hospitals or solution providers in that space. So we do not start anything before getting an on-ground, before establishing on-ground support. This is something that we did in Andhra, and this was a program which was directly overseen by the Chandra Naidu government. Here we partnered with various startups. So CARE was our partner, and we aligned with CARE during this prototype. A3, which is a IIT Bombay startup, and World Health Partners, I'm sure you would have heard, they already have a network in this area. In over 6 months, it's actually less than 6 months, because 6 months we prototyped, but actually ran the clinic close to 2 or 3 months. We were able to reach 500 patients across 8,000 village citizens in Mori and surrounding areas. We started in Mori, but we realized that it saturates fast. We have to go and be a little more mobile. We enabled expert consultations, and this is in terms of the cost saving for the community. So it was, and taking any service, there is a viable business model. It is a win-win on both the sides. The customer base is increased for the startup or the corporate, and in terms of the cost and the level quality of services, the rural community stands to benefit. So this is just to show. We had a closed door meeting with the CM, and here during during the display at the stalls, you're explaining him how, what we did. This is Dr. Somaraju, who is the chairman of CARE, and this and further down was my team who were working. Earlier this year, in March, we presented, as I said, during our annual United Nations presentation. This is Madam Lakshmi Puri, who is the Assistant Director General of the United Nations, who attended our event. And all these young people you see here are the fellows or the interns who worked with us in different projects in different geographies. So although, for example, these two, she was working in Uttarakhand, she was working in Andhra, they met for the first time in New York. So, and they presented their work. The work and the model, as I said, it's one thing to develop, but it's also important to talk about it in terms of what is working, what is not. We have been fortunate that we have been covered or have been invited to speak at these platforms to discuss more about our work, more about our projects, more about the frameworks that we have kind of set in place. As I said, our partners, Department of Science and Technology, our funding partner. Tata Trust and 1M1B together are implementing the Startup Gurukul project, UN Habitat, UN Women, for showcasing the projects at that level. We also have a key partnership with Berkeley, Haas, and also Global Social Venture Competition, which is hosted out of Berkeley, because the initial curriculum that we developed for entrepreneurship actually came from Berkeley, and we further customized it to suit local requirements. McKinsey Social Initiative, we were part of implementing their solutions, and they wanted feedback on how certain services are working and what is not working. CARE is one of our key partners going forward. We'll be scaling up with them in all these first steps. Thank you so much.
Fantastic talk. Before I ask questions, anyone's questions?